Good morning, everyone. Let's start with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master Paramahansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, dear friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Bless us with ever-deepening attunement to your divine presence, that we may live in this world in constant remembrance that you are always with us, guiding us and blessing us, and that everything that comes to us is a gift from the divine to help us grow into the light. Om. Peace. Amen. I'm departing once again from our scheduled text of the Art of Supportive Leadership. A little more than a week ago, I also took a detour because my friend Seva, our friend Seva, passed away suddenly. And today happens to be a very auspicious day. November 23rd, 2009, was the first initiation that Swami gave for the Naya Swami order, which he had created, a new renunciate order for a new age. And on that day in Assisi, Italy, he held the first initiation and he conducted it himself. And some of us, about 10 or 12 of us, came from either India or America to be part of that initiation. And we received sannyas vows, which is to become lifelong renunciates, which we already were, but it gave us the formal title of Swami, or Naya Swami. I'll explain all that in just a moment. And today is the 12-year anniversary of that initiation. I was part of that initiation. And astrologically speaking, the planet Jupiter, which represents the Guru in the horoscope, it completes from start, it makes a complete circuit every 12 years. So I'm not by any means very knowledgeable about astrology, although because my housemate Keshava Betts is an astrologer, I know more now than I did before he moved into the house. But I have experienced in my life the power of these 12-year cycles. If you think about your own life, the age of 12, the age of 24, 36, 48, depending how old you are, often very notable things happen at those periods, and my life has certainly been very responsive to the Jupiter cycles. So when I realized this was a 12-year cycle, it pleased me greatly. In the early years of spirituality in America, Swami Satchidananda, who was an Indian guru who was a disciple of Swami Shivananda, he started the Integral Yoga Institute. There are quite a number of very advanced disciples of Swami Shivananda, who Shivananda started the Divine Life Society in Rishikesh, and his disciples, Venkateshananda and Vishwananda, I think I'm mispronouncing that, Chidananda, Venkateshananda, I think I said. There were lots of very fine swamis, all of whom have now passed off the planet. But Satchidananda started, and it still exists, the Integral Yoga Institute, and his disciples were all the same. They were our cousins. And his ashram, this is all for a very short point, his ashram, he made them all swamis very early at that time. And they followed an Indian custom, which was that every 12 years they would shave their heads. And then for 12 years they wouldn't cut their hair, and they would let their hair grow. And then in India, you would shave your head again after 12 years, and you would throw your hair into the Ganges. This was the karma. Then you would let it all grow out again. So I was always aware of that cycle for that 25 years or so while that stayed in place for them. But it's a very important moment. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about the Naya Swami order, what it means to be a Naya Swami, what it means to me. In the year 2009, that was a time, Swami had a Brigu prediction, and I'm pretty sure all this is the same cycle. Swami had a Brigu prediction. Brigu was this ancient book of prophecy, and essentially it said that his last birthday would be in 2009. And he was living in India, and I went to India to be there for that birthday, because if it was his last birthday, I wanted to be there. And he was planning immediately to leave right after his birthday to go to Europe. And I was going to do all of that. I went to India, and then we were going to go to Europe. We were going to meet other Americans who were coming in when we got to Europe. And Swami became very unwell right at the time of his birthday. He had some kind of a seizure. His whole vision went black. His body became very weak. His brain was even a little bit scrambled. His nurse, Miriam, who was always with him for those last 12 years or so, she's written a very nice book called Swamiji. I highly recommend it. And she said whenever he would change continents, at that point in his life, he had 3 homes, one near the Assisi community, one in India, and one at Ananda village. And every few months, basically, or sometimes on a different pattern than that, he would shift from one to the other. Whenever he would shift, Miriam said, a lot of karma would run through his body. Swami had extraordinarily dramatic physical karma, but it wasn't his own karma. He used his body to work out the karma, to do tapasya for the sake of the work he was doing, and I believe literally to work out karma for individuals. In my book, Swami Kriyananda, as we've known him, I tell a story about a motorcycle accident that Swami had, and the man whose life he saved, I believe, by taking the karma on his own body. All during the litigation with SRF, Swami's body would always be the vehicle through which karma would run. How that works, I really don't know, but I know that it's a fact. And Swami himself confirmed as much when I asked him directly. Yes, of course, was his answer. So in India there, he suddenly had a total collapse of his health. And Miriam had to make a decision as to whether or not we would still travel. And she decided that every time they traveled, as soon as they faced into it and made the shift, he always got better. So after some consultation with Dr. Peter in America, with Jyotish and Devi, who were in America, not in India, we just decided to make the trip. So we made the trip, and we got to Italy. But instead of him getting better, he didn't get better. He remained very weak, and his health was very insecure. So eventually we get all the way to Assisi, and at that point, Swami was still living alone. Narayani came into his life very soon after that, and from that point until he passed away, she always had a room in his house, and so she supervised his well-being all the time. But at that time it wasn't so. He lived alone in Assisi, and he liked living alone, but we made a collective decision that he couldn't be alone. It was just not safe. So Anand spent the nights in his house, and various of the rest of us spent the days. And so in June there, I was on the afternoon shift, and Swamiji, he had some appointment that he was going to keep. He tried to maintain, it helped him to continue to do what he was doing. And I was on the afternoon shift, and I had to wake him up from a nap because people were coming over. He was in his pajamas. At that point, he was an old man, and I'd had to take care of my father at that stage of his life, so I knew what this was. I had to help him out of his pajamas, into his shirt. He was just passive. I had to button his shirt for him. I had to go into his closet and choose a shirt, so I just looked at his shirts, and I pulled out this beautiful indigo blue silk shirt that I knew he really liked. I'm just putting the shirt on, just chatting with him, saying, oh, if only the color of Swami's was blue instead of orange, you'd wear the color all the time, wouldn't you? Wouldn't it be nice if blue was the color? If we just changed the color to blue? Very seriously, in his just like passive state, Swami says, I'm thinking of doing exactly that. It was so fun with Swami because you would just be having an ordinary conversation and suddenly you would step into some deep reservoir of spiritual thought that you didn't even know was there. So I managed to get Swamiji ready for his guests, and I took him into the living room, which was just a matter of a few steps. It's the Assisi Kutir. It's a very small house. Now they call it Moksha Kutir because he left his body in that house. So he goes into the living room, but he stretches out on the couch, just completely like this, puts his hands over his heart and just closes his eyes. Well, I've gotten him dressed. I've gotten him to the living room. So I took the moment to make his bed, tidy up his bedroom. I was gone just a couple of minutes. I come back in, and Swami has his hands over his heart. His eyes are closed. He's absolutely still. I think, oh my God, he's left his body on my watch. I'm here supposed to keep him safe, and now he's died. And part of it was, good for you, Swamiji. You've earned your freedom. The other part of it was, oh no, like this. Fortunately, he spoke at that point. And he immediately started talking about this new Swami order that he has been thinking of starting. Now, what happened during that interlude, and Swamiji told me about it then, I believe, and then talked about it more fully later. Essentially, Divine Mother, Master, he didn't, I don't know the details, but he had a superconscious visitation, and basically he said to Master, I'll live or die, it's really up to you. And Master gave his life back to him, and he lived until 2013. He lived 4 more years. And he when he came out of that, now here's Swami, I'd been buttoning his shirt. All of a sudden, Swami's sitting up on the couch, and he's talking to me about this renunciate order that he's going to start, and that the color is not going to be orange because orange is burning up at the past, and how did he say it? He had lots of reasons. I'm not going to say them all here. But he said he wanted to start a renunciate order that was less concerned about what you were renouncing and was totally focused on where you were going. So instead of the fire of renunciation, orange, he wanted it to be the blue of Christ consciousness, the Krishna blue, the blue of the spiritual eye, because that's where we're going. And he says very seriously, this is what Satan was trying to stop by killing my body. But Swami had persevered against that challenge. Master had come to him in that moment when I was making his bed. And then all of a sudden he's going to be starting this new renunciate order. And then he just talked about, he's been thinking about this for years and years. He said, but one of the obstacles to it always was that, a huge core of the most dedicated people in the Ananda world were all married. And traditionally, the Swami order, as Adi Shankaracharya arranged it, was for monks and nuns, but for people who were not at all engaged even in that level of human life. And he said it had always been a stumbling block for him because if he started a Swami order and it was along those lines, then the core of Ananda devotees would be disqualified. And he said it had simply come to him that marriage, the way it was practiced at Ananda, was not an obstacle. And once that was overcome, and then then we ended up talking about what we were going to wear. The blue clothes, what it was going to look like. It was like in the first 15 minutes, we're talking about the clothes. And in fact, I said, oh, I have something in my closet that I brought with me that might be just what you want. This is just like, it's just a very small thing. Swami never let me drive his car. because he said, I'm a good driver except when I forget that I'm driving, which is while I'm driving, I forget that I'm driving because I get interested in some idea. It's not like I drive off the road, but so he never let me drive his car. He handed me the keys to his car and had me go get the blue outfit that I was talking about. I mean, he was so, now this is what's going to happen. And he just gets up, he walks into where his office is, and he starts writing a book. This is all within the same, well, probably by the time we finished talking, 30 minutes earlier, I'm buttoning his shirt. And now he's writing a book. And that evening, he calls a meeting of all the leaders who happened to be in Assisi at that time, and he introduces this whole, I'm starting a new renunciate order. This is what Satan was trying to stop. This may be the most important thing that I ever do. Now, interestingly, Adi Shankaracharya started the original Swami order. Swami says that he believes that our line of gurus were there at that time. When I went to, I never even knew it was there, but when we were on our way to Badrinath, one trip to India, and the road was washed out and we had to spend, I think, 2 nights in Jyotirmath, which is 7,000 feet as opposed to Badrinath, which is 12,000 feet. There's an ashram there that was Adi Shankaracharya's ashram, and the place where he would go into cosmic consciousness and meditate, a cave. I never even knew about this place. We just got stuck in that city, so we went to have some pilgrimage because we were with a big pilgrimage group. As soon as I stepped on that property, it just felt so familiar and so home-like to me. I mean, this was before any of this about the Swami order. But it pleased me to think that Swamiji was yet again carrying on the work of our masters for Dwapara Yuga, because so many of the rules that were created at that time, which were exactly right for that time, nobody honors them anymore. Swami shall not stay in any place for more than 3 days. He shall own no personal property. He shall never handle money, never have or handle money. I mean, those are just a few of the things. They're just completely impractical in Dwapara Yuga. Now, in ancient Vedic times, most of the sages had wives. But as Kali Yuga developed, the form and the separation of the different aspects of life became necessary in Kali Yuga. But now we're going up into Dwapara again. And part of Master's mission is you can be fully dedicated to God, and you can still do it in partnership. So all of these were playing into it. But the most important shift, and there's the book, there's a website you can go look at, A New Renunciate Order for a New Age. Naya simply means new. So Naya Swami is the new Swami order, as opposed to what has been around for all these many, many centuries. And laying out guidelines that people can conform to because they're consistent with the life we're having. And also, again, in Kali Yuga, where everything has to be, the form is so important, that kind of rejection, world renouncing, was essential, whereas in Dwapara Yuga, the spiritual and the material world operate more in harmony with each other. The essential necessity for renunciation has not changed, but the way it's expressed outwardly. But the inner reality is just the same. But the positive focus of basically blue instead of orange is what Swamiji wanted to do there. So he calls this group together. This is still in June, and he just starts talking to it. And I was so touched by Shivani. Shivani says to Swami, he was explaining it step by step. She said she's been married to Arjuna since 1974, I think. She said, do we have to renounce our husbands or wives in order to be part of this order? And I was so touched by that because I felt she would have done whatever he said. And he said, I don't see why that would be necessary, is how he put it. He said, you can together devote your lives to God as easily as you can individually if in your heart you are free. So for the next week or so, Swami wrote this book and so on and so on. And then when we get to November, which is where we are now, he decided to hold the first initiation. And so those of us who really felt called to do it came from America. Jyotish and Devi, Durga and Vidura myself, David. Who else would have been there? Padma and Hriman. Uma was already in Italy, Kirtani Anand, Shivani Arjuna, and others. I don't, but not too many others. Dharmadas and Nirmala came from India. Vijay came from India. And there was about 11 of us who traveled, who didn't live in Assisi, and there was this big van. I think there were 11 of us traveling together, and there were 10 seats in the van, so somebody always had to sit on the floor. And we called it the Swami Mobile. And we were in the middle of that, and someone came up with the idea, that certain groups of things have specific names. You call it a gaggle of geese, and there's a lot of funny words that you just use. My mind is blank on it. The herd or so on like that. So we decided, when you have a bunch of Naya Swamis together, what do you call it? And I think Dharmadas said, you call it a void. Because part of the vow says, I no longer exist as a separate entity, but offer myself unreservedly into thy great ocean of awareness. So we just moved around as a void, the group, all of us in our efforts to transcend. But as you can imagine, it was quite a moment. And then there's more than just the final vow of becoming a Naya Swami. There's the brahmachari vow, which is for single people who intend to stay that way. And then there's the Tyagi vow. The Tyagi vow is essentially a novice vow for being a Naya Swami for those who live in partnership with someone else. And then later, Swami added the pilgrim vow, because Swami felt it wasn't appropriate for those who are raising children. As he put it, the kind of personal involvement you have to have with your children is not consistent, when they're young, when your children are young, is not consistent with the kind of impersonal attitude a Tyagi or a Naya Swami needs to have toward life. And also the pilgrim vow was for those who did not want to be a monk or a nun, but had not yet met their life partner. And therefore they weren't in a position to become Tyagis, and they weren't inclined to become brahmacharyas. So he added the pilgrim vow, but the pilgrim vow didn't exist in that first initiation. And Swami put all the chairs in a circle. He put himself instead of being on the dais, he put himself on the congregation level, put all the chairs in a circle, put himself in a chair, put a very big picture of Master on one side and a very big picture of Babaji on the other. And then personally, put all of us through our vows. The Naya Swami vow, as opposed to the brahmacharya, the Tyagi, involved a fire, which is traditional in the sannyas initiation because everything is being burned up. It represents the divine fire. And so the vow is line by line. You can go into the website and see them all. And we would do a line, and then he would have us all put ghee into the fire and prostrate ourselves in front of the fire. I don't think we did a full prostration every time we put ghee in, but perhaps we did. I would have to ask others if they recall. But it was very unlike anything we'd ever done. And then he individually blessed us and put in this case, a blue scarf around our neck. Now, of course, there was similar solemnity for everyone else, but of course I remember the part that I was in the most. Then the next day, we went back to his house that evening, and there's a photograph. If you look in LIGHTBEARER, the book LIGHTBEARER, you'll find that photograph. And the next day, we all gathered in Swami's little kutir there and just started talking about what we were doing. At first, Swamiji wanted us to wear the blue habit, which he wanted it to be unisex. It would be for men and women the same. It would be a tunic that comes, to the knee or below the knee, and a pair of loose trousers. Now, that's an Indian outfit for women, and kurta pajama are not that unusual for men. So in India, it was not that complex. In the West, especially for the men. Women could walk around on it, and it was just a little bit of an unusual style, but for the men it was, to walk around in this blue robe, it was going to be pretty radical. And at that time, he later stepped back a little bit from it, but at that time, he was wanting people to wear this costume all the time. And I remember someone said, "Sir, we've spent decades trying to blend in. If we start dressing like this, we're suddenly going to look very odd. We've been doing our best to help people understand that they can be part of Ananda without having to be strange." So they said, "We spent all this time trying to blend in." Swami said, "I think perhaps it's time that we stand out." Just like that. He said, "Right now no one will know what this means, but as time passes, people will begin to understand and respect this." Now, he modified some of this afterwards. He and everyone just found it too inconvenient. Almost everyone converted to wearing some kind of blue clothes all the time. Because I personally had a passion for my wardrobe that was a little bit beyond what some of the other women felt, I set for myself very strict rules, which I have followed ever since, because I personally needed to do that. But all kinds of questions were asked. What should we wear? When should we wear it? The women asked questions like, there were women in the group whose hair had turned white, and they were coloring it to make it look dark. What about jewelry? What about earrings? Just like, those are the questions I remember because they related to me as a female, just this conversation. And Swami answered every single question by saying, "Do as you feel." Because it wasn't, he didn't ever want it to be that this is the institutional rule. This is between you and God. This is between you and God. So as each of those questions were raised, my hair is a natural color. Swami has always teased me, and in fact, in that context, when they said about dyeing their hair, he turned to me and he said, "I've been trying to persuade Asha to dye her hair white, but she just won't listen to me," which was also his way of kind of diffusing it, and so that we wouldn't become obsessed with details. I know that's why he did it, because he didn't want us to define our renunciation by whether or not we felt to color our hair. Most of the Naya Swamis don't, but some of them do. The question came up of earrings, and I put my hand on my ears, I took my earrings out, and I never put them back in. But that's not the same decision that others have made. Do as you feel. That's what Swami wanted from us. But it was so extraordinary, it's the only word I can think of, to be sitting there and realizing what Swami had just done. And he made each of us apply. It was not assumed. I just assumed, since I was there, that of course I would be part of it. But he took the trouble to ask me. He said, "Are you going to take this initiation?" And it was like, do I have to tell you that I'm going to? So I said, "Yes, sir, of course." But then I realized I had to ask him, "Will you approve me to do it?" But then later I said to Swami, and because this came for me at a very interesting time, 12 years ago I was 62. So I had just passed a 12-year mark, which was 60. My spiritual life has been extraordinarily dynamic for me, but I was asking myself, I pictured the range of 60 to 80. I've had to play the part of a female. I'm very comfortable in the female role. It feels natural to me. I think I've been a woman for a long time. Whenever I look forward, I tend to always see myself in a female body. I don't know. And when I've had to play the part because I've just had to learn how to be a girl. That's just the only way I can say it. And when I, at the age 40 to 60, which is the time, at that point I'd spent here in Palo Alto and had to assume this leadership role, that's when I had to train myself to be a girl. I had to figure out, how do you present yourself as a magnetic female? Because it was helpful to the role I was in that I was female, because it was a time when female leadership, was sort of being respected. So I trained myself. I met a wonderful stylist and color consultant, and She told me how to be a girl, and then I followed it. And then I began to like it. But here I am, I'm 60 now. And like, how am I going to make the last 20 years, or the next 20 years of this incarnation as dynamic as everything that's come before? And I was looking at older women and trying to think, why do some look exhausted and why do some still have magnetism? I was just trying to figure it out. What job will I do? How should I do it? All the different things. Then Swami offers the Naya Swami role. Now, my first 10 years on the spiritual path, I lived in the monastery. I was a brahmacharini, and I expected to be a Swami. Marriage surprised me. So all of a sudden, in fact, all of us, because most of us had lived in the monastery at the beginning, all of a sudden, this expectation that we would be able to take sannyas, which had just been removed because of life circumstances, was being handed back to us. So it was thrilling. And I said to Swami, I'm so grateful for your founding this order. I said, I feel like taking this sannyas vow because, this is a vow of absolute renunciation. This is not, just business as usual. I just wear blue. And I still have all my own personal interests and I have all my own personal things and all of this stuff. No, this is a vow of sannyas. This is absolute renunciation. And I said to Swamiji, I told him that about the last 20 years. I said, I feel the opportunity to take a vow of sannyas at this point in my life will save me from spiritual mediocrity. And Swami just looked at me very seriously and said, yes. And therefore, I do feel it has defined my reality and has allowed me, instead of just sinking comfortably into the last years, to challenge every habit that I have. I no longer exist as a separate entity, but offer myself unreservedly into thy ocean of awareness. From now on, I embrace as the only purpose of my life the search for God. I accept nothing, no one as my own, no talent, no success, no achievement as my own, but all belongs to thee alone. What joy. And I just wanted to share it with all of you. God bless you.